I'm Stuart Kurkowski from Comcast Software Architect for CTS. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in the next slide. What we're going to talk about today is really alternate content, SCUDdy 224, and how content providers kind of convey that information to distribution partners, especially when they're streaming traditional alternate content, things like sports, and we'll talk about that. It's a lot bigger than that today as it's kind of transitioning, and so we'll talk through that. But first of all, before I get too far, kind of introduce the concept of Comcast Technology Solutions. Everybody's probably heard of Comcast, the mothership as we call it. Comcast Technology Solutions is a division of Comcast, but we're more outward facing. So we're looking at partnering with advertisers, content providers, distribution partners, all those things where we can take a lot of the successes that Comcast has done development work-wise, solution-wise, and share it with the broader community. So I work with a lot of the MVPDs, a lot of the digital MVPDs, a lot of the streaming distribution partners. All those kind of groups are the ones that I work with regularly on a day-to-day basis. The Comcast Technology Solutions division is pretty big. We're based out of Denver, Colorado, but we have lots of employees all around the United States as well as overseas. And our kind of charter, I guess, for the 20 years, we used to be Comcast Wholesale, now we've kind of changed to Comcast Technology Solutions, is really that broadcast to digital technologies, trying to make that transition as we've come across successes within Comcast, sharing those with others and continuing to move that forward, which is really the bottom bullet there, kind of bringing innovation and technology to the industry. We all win when we can converge on standards and do it in a standard format and those kinds of things. And so that's really kind of what Comcast Technology Solutions is chartered to do, and so that's why we're here today. To kind of put it in context, the famous book, The Sun Also Rises, one of the famous quotes out of that was, how did Mike go bankrupt? And if you remember, he says, gradually, then suddenly. I think that kind of describes where we're at with SCUDdy 224 and alternate content and this transition from the broadcast to the digital. There was lots of issues in the world of SCUDdy 224 and alternate content that we'll talk about in a couple slides that really get captured by that phrase of gradually then suddenly, and I think you'll see that as we go through the talk. So to kind of put it in context, everybody kind of jumps on that first bullet when they think of alternate content or how we convey information between content providers and distribution partners and how we control that. The sports blackout was obviously kind of the big bullseye target for that. When you have live sports, as many of you know, when you're streaming, there's always restrictions around that. It could be geo restrictions where a home team has certain rights and you can't broadcast it outside of that. Old days, you had issues where the stadiums didn't sell out, so then they needed to, black it out to try and get people in the stadium. You also have even restrictions today down to business agreements, right? Like NFL games that can only be distributed on phones if they're Verizon network phones, right? Not on others. And so you have lots of restriction information that you need to impart on that are still part of sports blackout. But it's gotten a lot bigger than that as you look at the ecosystem today, and what's causing a lot of burdens is some of these other categories up here. One is terrestrial video delivery. In our traditional satellite market, you use satellite to distribute spot beams of information, right? And so if you sent something to LA, it went to LA. If you sent it to Boston, it went to Boston. If you sent it to New York, it went to New York. You didn't get that mixed up very often. Now that we're using terrestrial delivery and all that content's available to everybody all the time, you need to be able to control which markets get to see it, which ones don't. Another category that's really impactful when it comes to streaming is web embargoes, right? People think of sports blackout as some of the biggest issues. Some of the trickiest schedules that we're seeing actually gets down to black and white content, right? The old I Love Lucy episodes and things like that. They have restrictions based on content rights that they've gotten that were signed long before we ever had iOS devices, right? And so when they got those agreements, they don't have the rights to show that on mobile devices or over the internet. So you have all these web embargoes that have to be now enforced, and how do you convey that again on a machine-to-machine level? Another category that's kind of popped up here recently is the OTT experience. Traditionally in the blackout was really about the live event, and when you're streaming it, how at the start of the event, I blacked it out, right? And I send somebody to slate or just put up a sign that said not available in your area. And at the end of the event, you lift that restriction. That's kind of the title of today's talk, is no dead air, right? You don't want that to happen. You want your users to be able to keep watching something from yours, even if it's not the live event they're allowed to see. You want to steer them to something else, maybe a VOD asset, maybe something that's playing to keep eyeballs on your feed. But part of the OTT experience is they want to be able to do that same decisioning that we just talked about. When a program starts, I'm going to black you out. they want to do that even for the EPG or the electronic program guide up to like 2 weeks out, right? And so the scenario is, if I look at my program guide and I see the game on Sunday that I want to record and I record it, I want to make sure that I'm recording the game, right? I don't want to get to Sunday night and I'm ready to watch it and I turn it on and all I recorded was not available in your area, right? And you're like, what the heck? I wanted the game and now I didn't get it, right? And so what we're finding out with the OTT experience is that they want this information weeks ahead of time so they can run all that same decisioning over the same logic that's going to happen live. So on the schedule, they never even show you that game. They show you whatever is going to be available, so you can have a much more accurate user experience. And so that's driving a lot of what we'll talk about in the coming slides. And the fifth category here is one that's kind of just popped up both in the US as well as in Europe, but it really became concrete earlier in the EU, where they've passed a bunch of laws now about cross-border portability. So if I stream content in Europe and I'm a citizen in one of the European countries that's part of the EU and I get that content at home, if I travel anywhere in the EU, I have to be able to get that same content, which makes it a little tricky for the distribution partners now to be able to make sure that that content that I could see at home, I can now see away. But at the same time, they're putting more restrictions on the country boundaries. And this has always been an issue in Europe because satellite spot beams don't follow the country borders very well. But if you couple this with number two, the terrestrial delivery, people can get content all over the place and there's big fines if you get it outside of your borders. And so they were using geo blocking and things like that to try and enforce the borders. Now they can do it much more dynamically with SCUDY 224 and things like that. We also have the same issue here in the United States when we take a lot of affiliate channels that maybe in the past were only part of New York and they had a spot beam that they're used to operating in. And when they black out a sports event, maybe it's only 4 or 5 zip codes that get blocked out. Well, now if I deliver that same content terrestrially to a partner that's global, my blackout zone just went from a couple zip codes to maybe the whole US or something like that. And so border portability and understanding those borders and restricting that is definitely a big player. So the way we convey that in SCUDY 224, and we'll get to 224 here in a couple slides, but is through a lot of metadata, right? What we're talking about here is mostly the out-of-band metadata that flows with the video. So you have a video that you want to display, like the football game or something, and we have this out-of-band metadata. And traditionally, when we think of metadata, you think of restrictions, maybe like a DRM restriction based on your account or something, or maybe a geo-blocking restriction, something like that. But with this out-of-band SCUDY 224 format now, we can put a lot more metadata in that out-of-band channel. And some of the traditional things like an ID, a description, start and end time, those are things we oftentimes think of, right? I have a program start somewhere defined, and when this program starts, you switch to this alternate content, let the program play, and then at the end of it, at the end time, then we'll switch back. And it could be time-based or signal-based. But you can see here that we've rapidly figured that there's a lot more other things that we can ship with this video today. As we work through it. And so if you see the list, it kind of started with the traditional things, like I said, start and end time, maybe an ID or two. We're also seeing now that alternate IDs, as you see up here, there's lots of IDs that come with video. Traditionally, we've thought of maybe a Tribune or a Rovi or something like that. We have one content provider today that's flowing this metadata through our system. It's up to 7 IDs on every piece of content. And so even ways to convey that. Additionally, now that they have your attention as a distribution, rather than just saying this program starts here and ends here and you ship to an alternate, some of the other things they're able to do is like trick mode restrictions. So I can restrict when you can fast forward, when you can rewind. You also see up here in the middle at the top, look back and start over rights. Those are another big one that keeps coming up. So if I join a program in progress, do I have the rights to start back over at the beginning and play catch up, as some of you call it in your streams? Or maybe I don't have the rights to do that. Likewise, if I have the rights to start over, do I also have the rights to look back, which means maybe up to like 72 hours I can go back and find a program in the schedule and play it again. All those kind of rights can be conveyed a lot more than what we just think of as traditional alternate content, right? Black this out or don't. And so we can put a lot of that information. We've also just started some tests in the last couple weeks with a couple content providers now that are also including their ADI files in their streams, in their 224 feed. And so now, in theory, if you look on here, you'll see that it has credits, episode title, episode ID, posters, all that kind of information. So their full ADI is in the stream, and the theory is here, as they're streaming this content, if I can do live to VOD capture, now I have everything I need to add this asset to my VOD library. So I can do that all in one step, which greatly reduces the workflow because now I don't need a separate VOD pitch. I don't need a separate pitch of their ADI. It's all included in there through that. And as part of those rights, and you'll see in the middle DVR, some of those things now you can control if somebody can record your content or not, if they can save it. You can also control whether it has C3 restrictions or C7 restrictions. Maybe I can't replace the ads, maybe I can on playback. And so there's a lot of information now that's getting conveyed through the 224, the out-of-band metadata stream that goes a lot farther than what we traditionally thought of as this program's starting, go to blackout, this program's ending, come back. There's a lot more information that can be conveyed. You even see on the side here, sports stats, some of those things are adding. So it's getting a lot richer. And this is really a classic case of where I said earlier, the quote from the book was gradual versus sudden. I think one of the issues we had starting out in SCUDdy 224 was the fact that a lot of distribution folks said, I'm not going to build anything that can read this and parse this because nobody's given it to me, right? I don't have any content providers that are giving me 224, so why should I parse it? And you talk to the content providers and they say exactly the same thing, just in the opposite side, right? We're not going to produce any of this information and pass it to any distribution partners until they can consume it. So you had this kind of chicken and egg or cart and horse problem. And that's where we gradually were for probably about a year. And I think now you'll see that 224 has really gained a lot of momentum. And so now we're suddenly getting to the point where we have distribution partners coming to us saying, we want your feed, we want your information, and it has to be in 224 format so that we can ingest it. And so to give you a concept there, how many people in the room can spell 224? Anybody spell it? All right, so it's up there. We'll talk briefly about it. Just to give you a context as we talk about it. It is Event Signaling Notification Interface, also known as ESNI. It's a confusing name because Cable Labs has an ESNI standard for a while. One of the goals of the SCUDdy 224 standard was to kind of rein that in. We had ESNI from the Cable Labs world. We also had it from the OATC community and several other places that were out there trying to define alternate content. And so one of the goals of SCUDdy 224 was to kind of bring all those communities back together, reach consensus, and then capture that in a standard that could take us forward. I think that was one of the big first steps in going from the gradual to suddenly, because now it does have momentum and things. And the main goal behind it is really that second bullet, transmission of event and policy information. So I can send you event information that describes an event, and we'll talk more about that on the next slide. But then I could put all these policies with it. And like I said, I think the gradual part was people trying to define the start of an event and an end of an event. Now suddenly we're seeing that, hey, I got all kinds of other stuff that I could put in to describe an event. And so really it is the schedule-based, and also it can be signal-based or time-based. Obviously signal-based is the preference. If it's signal-based information, it gives you a nice user experience. I can be frame accurate in my switching and doing those kind of things. And so it does convey that information. And it really started out of the bottom bullet there, the traditional, right, satellite IRD delivery mechanisms that we have today. The content providers are used to doing that, sending it over the satellite, controlling the IRDs, dictating what feed gets to what IRD. And now when they go to terrestrial delivery and all this content's available through the IP and you're streaming it, they lose some of that control, right? And so there had to be a mechanism to replace that, to where they had confidence that they were giving you the right instructions to be able to make the right decisions over the programming. And so SCUDdy 224 kind of gives that replacement. For those that don't know about SCUDdy 224, I'll give you about a 2-minute tutorial, which doesn't do it a whole lot of justice, but the standard itself is pretty short. It's not that many pages long. But as I like to say, it gives you enough rope to hang yourself. It defines the standard, defines the space, but how you implement it is the real key to 224. And so it has only 5 types of messages. The first one is a media, and a media, if you kind of think of it as a channel. So a media could be, Fox Sports 1 or something like that. And then media points is any point in that channel, so it represents events, right? So usually I have a pair of media points that go with each event, one for the start and one for the end. That's rapidly growing. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But so I could have a media that maybe has 14 days worth of information in it, and so it has 500 media points, the start and end of each program that's coming up for the next 14 days. Each one of those media points is an opportunity then to trigger or to start a policy. And a policy then looks at a viewing policy, which tells you what you can do with this content. So again, traditionally the thought was the program starts, the policy would be that this set of audience members get blacked out, and now I want to be able to replace that with an alternate content. I want to be able to replace it with a VOD asset or something else. That all comes through the viewing policy. And then last is audiences. And this is a perfect example. In the standard, there's like 41 different audience types, all the way from zip code restrictions for both home and geo, all the way to DMAs, to device types, all those things in between. And so this is a perfect example of where it can get really complicated in implementing that. And if you can rein that in and try and funnel it down to your use cases, it's very helpful. But again, the concept behind 224 is really taking you from a media point, which is some event that's either triggered by time, like 2 o'clock this afternoon, something's going to happen, or a signal, a SCSI 35 marker that's seen in the video. At both points in time there, you have a media point that's become active. And so now you're looking through your policies, your viewing policies, and your audiences. And as I mentioned earlier, the traditional viewing policy either said go to slate or go to some alternate content. Now what we're seeing is a lot more actions, right? No fast forwards, no rewind, no recording. You can record, but there's C3 restrictions on replacing ads. All those things are starting to show up now in the viewing policies for the users so that you can define that. And because it's defined per audience, I can make this pretty dynamic, right? When I stream content now, if I'm streaming to one partner A, they might have a set of business rules that I have with them where they're allowed to record my content. Partner B has a different business agreement and they're not allowed to record the content. So I can have individual viewing policies now per audience. And so that's a key part of conveying that information. And so the advantages then of having this construct out there for content providers is now I can match program information to audiences, right? And I can give you those very specific policies. And because it's the full gamut, right? It could be VERDs, it could be zip codes, it could be addresses, it could be a particular device type, like only iOS devices, or like, for example, the NFL games where the football games can only be on a Verizon phone, right? I can convey that information to you now. And secondly, I can standardize that metadata format, right? If you've worked in the alternate content space, historically we were getting CSV files, emails saying this program's now cleared, shut this program off. I know we talked with one distribution partner that hired like 20 people just to manage spreadsheets. They get emailed on a weekly basis to set up the schedule, right? And so they can standardize all that, which obviously simplifies operations. Again, it's multi-platform, right? I can set up this feed one time as a content provider and then send it out to all my distribution partners. And the big one there too is that it's machine to machine, right? We don't have humans going in and blocking things, setting up IRD, commanding and all that kind of stuff. This is all machine to machine in an automated format. And then the bottom one there is another key one, is auditing, right? As much as this is a positive, this is also kind of the holy grail yet in this space, is how do I audit this kind of thing, right? If in the traditional IRD sense, if I had an IRD that was in New York and I had another IRD in Boston and all that, I could put something behind that IRD, check the IRD that it got the right commanding information, put something behind it and audit it and say, okay, it's switched, so I know the 10,000 houses that are hooked to it are all switched and everybody's good, right? When I get to this world, right, where we're OTT and TVE and all that information, it becomes a pretty intractable problem to try and figure out all the different device combinations, the zip code combinations and all that stuff. I can't just sample anymore and come up with anything constructive. So it helps with auditing in the fact that right now, if you have a standardized feed, I can run a decision engine over that, and I can even say next Saturday at 2 o'clock, this device and this zip code, if I ask my decision manager what it's going to do, it'll tell me you're going to get this feed or you're going to be on this feed. I can test it, I can audit it. That's one level of reassurance for those content providers that are used to having all the control coming off the satellite. But likewise, on the distribution partner side, those that are getting your streams and executing, I can reduce the workflow, right? I don't have this army of people now managing spreadsheets and trying to work through that stuff. Also, as we mentioned earlier, I can do an accurate and dynamic EPG. I can take that same schedule you send me with all the execution rights for audiences, viewing policies, all that. I can play that out as far as you give me data. So if you give me data for 2 weeks, I can make a nice accurate program guide now 2 weeks out, so I won't ever tease my users or viewers into seeing something that I think they're going to get excited about, and then when it shows that they don't get it, I can make it very accurate. Likewise, if I know there's alternate content coming and there's a section where they're not going to get something, I can substitute something in for that, right? Keep eyeballs on my stream so I can sell more ads and do that kind of stuff. And so the EPG data work's been really exciting in this space. Likewise, it's machine to machine, so again, I don't have to have an army of folks doing that. And the blackout management kind of goes both ways, right? I don't show them something in the EPG they're not going to get, so they don't have a bad user experience. Likewise, because it's automated, I don't have any gotchas where I started it for a short ways and then I realized it was, it was blacked out and I pulled them away. And then ad schedules we'll talk about in a coming slide, and the ADI files I mentioned earlier. As content providers get sharper on this, they're saying, well, hey, I have your attention, right? I told you when the start of the program was, and I was telling you what the alternate is. While I'm telling you that, I could also give you instructions on if you can capture this and convert it to VOD. Then I could also give you the ADI files. I could give you all that information that goes with it. And so now I have a live to VOD capture, and I've totally taken out the delivery that needs to be done when I pitch VOD assets separately. So that's added there. And then also the boundary management piece as well is another one, again, that's been exciting, especially in the EU. And so to make all this work, it'd be nice if you had a platform that could manage all this SETE stuff, right? Take in all this disparate data on the front end and work through that. And so, you know, when you can do that, then you can convey your full linear schedule. And like I said, we're working with content providers as CTS, where they're pushing now up to 14 days of information. We have a couple that are experimenting with 30 days, but trying to get that information out ahead of time so that you can build those bits of information, and along with that, define your audiences and things like that. As I tell lots of people, I spend about a quarter of my time with the lawyers in the room, because when you start talking about this metadata transmission, a lot of it comes down to business agreements and how this gets played out on the execution side, right? And so it can get pretty complicated. And so by setting all this up, they have an opportunity then to define those audiences, make sure the business folks are happy, the lawyers are happy, and then execute those rules. And then the second bullet there is that I can, you know, get transitions and identify that alternate content, so I can keep eyeballs on my content. I can keep streaming them something, right? If they don't want the game, there might still be another show that they're used to seeing on my channel that I can now provide to them as an alternate, and do that. And again, I can do it in advance, which ties into the coming slide. And then the operation teams can make real-time changes, right? We know this isn't static stuff, right? Games run long, games get rained out. All those kind of information need to be conveyed and controlled as well. And so since it's all machine to machine, if you have an interface to work through that, you're allowed to edit it, do those kind of changes, and you can make those changes real time. And so that makes live sports happen. And so that's kind of where we're at today in the world of SCUDdy 224, and where content providers are and where our distribution partners are. So what's coming next? One of the things that people have figured out is, now that they've figured out how to do program starts and program ends, the next logical step is all those other breaks that come in our content, right? And that really centers around ad support. So now if I can get 14 days worth of program starts and ends, if you can also add your ad break data in there for me, I can also see where the breaks are coming up over the next 14 days. And in theory, the business folks could tie to that and start doing sales of where the local ad avails are versus other ones. There's a second part of this ad support that's just now coming in. And if you saw the latest version of SCUDdy 224, which just came out about a month ago, there's a bunch of examples added in for ad support where I can identify my national ads and what's in those ad breaks, so that when you get a local ad, we can do ad exclusion, things like that. So if I just played a Ford ad, a national Ford ad, then it's your local break. You could look at information and say, oh, I don't want to play, you know, a Honda ad or something, or maybe I want to play a local Ford dealer ad that ties to the previous one, things like that. You can do a lot of that now in the ad break information. Just like we could control the program starts and ends, now we can look at that for ad break information. I think the sky's the limit as we start to add ad information in there. The big burden on the ad one is obviously on the people producing the streams, right? They got to be able to convey that information. Oftentimes they don't know that until right before the show airs, not 14 days out. So trying to get ahead of that is kind of the issue. But the mechanics and the mechanisms and the templates and things are there to make that happen. Secondly is that advanced auditing, as I mentioned earlier. Auditing is a big one for the content providers because they're kind of letting the ropes loose over the IRD traditionally. How we audit that, we've pushed the rope a little bit in the newest version of SCUDdy 224, where we're kind of mandating some things on the distant end for people to be able to audit and kind of query the decision manager and things like that. But how you audit the whole set is very difficult, right? If you have a particular feed and it hits a distribution partner that's device-based and zip code-based, that feed can turn into multiple different scenarios, right? Different combinations of device and zip code and location. It could be also unique for each content provider, so I can't just say, how many streams did you produce, right? Did you split that into 10 streams? You might only have audiences in 9 of the 10 combinations, and so if you missed one, is that bad on you, or is it just because you didn't have anybody in that category, right? So auditing is still an issue that we're looking at. Also then, how do we streamline these video workflows, right? If I'm a content provider that's pitching you this live content, and I'm also giving you all the ADIs and all that kind of stuff, so that you can do live to VOD capture and have everything you need to add it instantly to your VOD library. That streamlines a lot of workflows, but it also means that you have to have confidence in that feed and be able to do all that before you're ever going to turn off like your VOD pitch and things like that. So streamlining those workflows is definitely something that's coming. And then another one is really the support for satellite to terrestrial distribution, right? A lot of folks are already doing terrestrial distribution, but some of the big broadcasters are still slow, but we're starting to see several of them now that are coming off of satellite contracts, not renewing satellite contracts, things like that. And so for them to be able to transition from that controlled world of IRDs and steering and tuning off the satellite to a terrestrial delivery where I give you all of my content in one big pipe, you know, it takes some confidence on their part. And so being able to work through that process, there's obviously great benefits. You can get a higher quality video. I can give you MES feeds and things like that I can't do off the satellite. And so I think it's coming, but it definitely, as we talked about earlier, that gradual to suddenly is what we see before us. I think the gradual part, the waiting for, I'm not going to do anything as a distribution partner until the content providers give it to me and vice versa. We've broken through that deadlock. And so now I think you see that there's a lot of SCUDdy 224 things flowing. And like I said, we're seeing content providers come to us saying, I want to be able to give 224 to my partners, and I want full 224 to decorate my streams. And we're also seeing partners come to us saying, hey, I want this content from this content provider, but I wanted to have 224 in it, and so pull that through. And so I think we've broken through that to where sudden now is the kind of the talk with 224. And then these things will be coming soon to add on top of it, which will definitely make it kind of the cornerstone of delivering that instructions. So, all right, I think that's kind of the run through. Comcast Technology Solutions, that's again where I work, and then here's my email if you have questions. I'd love to hear from you. If you also go to the Comcast Technology Solutions site, I have a more generic kind of 224 overview video that's available out there that we did last year at the SCUDdy 224 Summit in Denver, that kind of gives you the basics of SCUDdy 224 as well. This was kind of like a follow-on to that. So, all right, any comments, questions? All right, well, you survived your afternoon session, so congratulations. So the video folks are excited too, right? You're done. All right, thank you.